What's up, Lions Nation? Happy Tuesday. Now pay attention to this. Something big is happening behind the scenes, and if you take a closer look at this offseason, you can feel it's not just about the upcoming season. The front office is sending a very clear message. They know exactly the window they have, and they're going all in to make the most of it. Because here's the reality. From the outside, it might feel like the Lions didn't make a big splash in free agency. And that's not just fan perception. Like, even an anonymous NFL executive basically said the same thing, pointing out that Detroit didn't do anything particularly notable in terms of major personnel additions outside of some special teams pieces. But what's interesting is the reasoning behind that. The belief is that this team already has a lot of talent, enough that they don't need to chase big names in free agency. Instead, the focus is clearly on building through the draft. And if you think about it, that should give fans a certain level of confidence. This isn't a team scrambling to fill holes with expensive veterans. This is a team that believes its core is already strong. At the same time, though, there are still concerns, especially on the defensive side of the ball. There are clear needs, particularly when you look at positions like edge rusher, and that's where the pressure shifts heavily onto the draft. If this front office gets it right, everything looks smart. If they miss, those quiet free agency decisions will be questioned. Now, at the same time all of this is happening, there's another storyline developing that fans are watching closely, and that's the situation involving Taylor Decker. When the possibility of him leaving came up, a lot of people immediately worried about the worst case scenario, him ending up with a division rival. But from what's being said, that doesn't seem likely at all. In fact, there's a strong indication that he's very against the idea of playing for teams like the Chicago Bears or the Green Bay Packers. And honestly, that says a lot about how he views his time in Detroit. After investing so much physically and emotionally into one franchise, the idea of switching sides within the NFC North just doesn't sit right with him. That kind of mindset is something fans can respect, even if his future is uncertain. Because make no mistake, if he does move on, it's probably going to be about chasing a Super Bowl. And when you start thinking about potential fits, you can see why a team on the verge of contention would make sense for him. But his situation also ties directly into a bigger conversation about the Lions' offensive line and what they might do next. Because when you look at the draft, one name that's starting to generate real buzz is Monroe Freeling. The idea of him potentially being available when Detroit picks is something that would completely change the outlook of this offensive line. We're talking about a player with elite athletic traits, rare size, and a profile that fits exactly what this coaching staff values. There's still development needed, no question, but the upside is massive. And this is where things get really interesting, because it leads directly into the biggest debate surrounding this team right now. What should they do in the draft? Do they stay put? Do they trade back? Or do they make an aggressive move and trade up? There are strong arguments on both sides. On one hand, trading back makes a lot of sense. This roster still has multiple needs: edge, linebacker, cornerback, safety, and even depth pieces on offense. Adding more draft capital, especially after losing picks in previous moves, could give the Lions the flexibility they need to fill more of those gaps. If you can move back and still land a player you like while picking up an extra third-round pick, that's a move that could pay off in a big way. On the other hand, there's the argument for being aggressive. This team is in a competitive window right now. With key players in their prime and the Super Bowl conversation very real, there's a case to be made that you go get a difference maker. A high-level player on a rookie contract for 5 years could be incredibly valuable, especially with big contracts looming for current stars. But here's the risk. Trading up means giving up picks, possibly not just this year, but next year too. And if this team truly has multiple needs, sacrificing depth for one player could backfire. This isn't a roster that's just one piece away. It's closer than it used to be, but there are still several areas that need to be addressed. So now it really comes down to philosophy. Do you trust the depth of this draft and try to build a more complete roster? Or do you take a swing and go after a top-tier talent who could elevate the team immediately? Because the way this front office approaches that decision is going to tell us everything about how they truly view this team. Are they building something sustainable, or are they ready to push all in right now? And that's the question I want to leave you with. If you're in that draft room, what are you doing? Staying put? Trading back for more picks? Or going all in and trading up for a star? And that's where everything starts to come into sharper focus, because once you accept that the Lions are not just building for the future, but actively managing a Super Bowl window, every single decision begins to carry more weight, especially in the draft. If they choose to stay put, it signals discipline. It means Brad Holmes and this front office trust their board, trust their evaluations, and believe that the right player will fall to them without forcing anything. And based on how this team has drafted in recent years, there's a strong argument to support that approach. They've consistently found value, developed talent, and built one of the most exciting young cores in the league without needing to overreach. But if they trade back, that sends a different kind of message, one rooted in awareness. Awareness that this roster, as promising as it is, still has multiple gaps that need to be addressed if they want to truly compete with the elite teams. Adding another third-round pick, or even more capital, could allow them to attack several positions instead of just one. And when you list out the needs, edge rusher, linebacker, cornerback, safety, depth at running back, even tight end depth, it becomes clear how valuable those extra picks could be. Now flip the perspective again and look at the trade-up scenario. This is the bold move. This is the kind of decision that tells the entire league. The Lions believe they are right there, not close, not building, right there. Because teams don't give up valuable draft capital lightly. They do it when they believe one specific player can change everything. And that ties back into what was mentioned about the current roster construction, with players like Jared Goff, Aiden Hutchinson, Amon-Ra, St. Brown, and Sam Laporta in their prime. The clock isn't ticking in a panic sense, but it is very real. Eventually, those big contracts stack up. Eventually, you have to make tough financial decisions. And that's exactly why hitting on impact players on rookie deals becomes so critical. So if there's a prospect they truly believe is a difference maker, not just good, but someone who can step in immediately and elevate a position of need, then trading up starts to make a lot more sense. You're not just drafting for potential at that point, you're drafting for impact right now. But here's the part that can't be ignored. This team still isn't just one player away. That's the reality. Even with all the progress, even with the talent already in place, there are still multiple spots where improvement is needed. And if you give up too much to move up, you risk creating new holes while trying to fill one. That's why this decision feels so balanced on a knife's edge. There's no obvious right answer. Staying put could land you a high upside player like Monroe Freeling if things fall your way. Trading back could strengthen the roster across the board. Trading up could land you a game changer, but at a cost. And maybe the most important part of all this is how it connects back to the quiet free agency we talked about earlier. Because that wasn't inactivity, that was confidence. Confidence in the core, confidence in the process, and confidence that the draft is where this team will take its next step. Now it's just about execution. Because if they nail this draft, suddenly the lack of big free agency moves looks like a masterstroke. If they miss, the questions will come fast. So as everything lines up, the roster, the draft strategy, the Decker situation, the long-term financial picture, it all points to this moment being one of the most defining stretches of Brad Holmes' tenure. And if you take one more step back and really connect all the dots, you start to see that this isn't just about one draft pick, one player, or even one offseason. It's about identity. Because over the past few years, what Brad Holmes and Dan Campbell have built in Detroit is not just a roster, it's a philosophy. Tough, disciplined, built through the trenches, and developed from within. That's why the idea of forcing a move, especially trading up, almost feels like it goes against the DNA they've established. This front office has shown patience, they've shown restraint, and more importantly, they've shown they don't panic. But at the same time, great teams know when to shift gears, and that's the tension you're seeing right now. Do they stay true to that long-term draft and develop model no matter what? Or do they recognize that the window is open and take a calculated risk to maximize it? Because let's be honest, the expectations have changed. This is no longer a team fans are just hoping makes the playoffs. This is a team people are talking about in the Super Bowl conversation. And when you reach that level, the margin for error gets smaller. Every move is magnified. Every decision is scrutinized. Even the Taylor Decker situation plays into that identity conversation. His reluctance to join division rivals says something about the culture that's been built in Detroit. Players don't just come here anymore. They invest here. They buy in. And even when they consider leaving, there's a line they don't want to cross. That matters. That's not something every franchise has. But culture alone doesn't win championships. Talent does, depth does, execution does. And that's why this draft feels like such a pivotal moment. Not because it has to fix everything overnight, but because it needs to push this team one step closer to being complete. Whether that comes from landing a high upside tackle, reinforcing the defense with multiple contributors, or making a bold move for a premium talent, the outcome has to move the needle. There's also something else quietly looming in the background: the future financial structure of this team. As those young stars continue to perform, the price tag goes up, and when that happens, you rely even more on hitting in the draft. Cheap, controllable talent becomes the lifeline that allows you to keep your core together while still competing at a high level. So every pick matters, not just in terms of immediate impact, but in terms of sustainability. And that's why, no matter which direction they choose, stay, trade back, or trade up, the key isn't just the move itself, it's the execution of that move. It's identifying the right players, trusting the evaluations, and continuing the pattern that got them to this point in the first place. Because if they do that, if they stay consistent with what's worked while adapting just enough to capitalize on this window, then everything lines up. The quiet free agency makes sense. The draft strategy makes sense. The long-term vision makes sense. And most importantly, the path to contention becomes real, not just hopeful. But if they overthink it, if they force something that isn't there, or if they miss on key opportunities, then suddenly all those small questions start to grow bigger. That's why this moment matters so much, because at the end of the day, that's what this entire situation comes down to: belief. Belief in the front office, belief in the coaching staff, and belief that what we've seen over the last few seasons isn't just a phase, but the foundation of something sustainable. The Detroit Lions are no longer trying to prove they belong. Now they're trying to prove they can finish. And finishing is a completely different challenge. It's one thing to build momentum, to stack talent, to create a culture that players buy into. It's another thing entirely to take that final step where every weakness gets exposed and every decision is tested under pressure. That's where great teams separate themselves, not just by how they build, but by how they respond when the stakes are at their highest. And that's exactly why this draft, this offseason, and these decisions feel heavier than usual. If they stay patient and hit on their picks, they reinforce everything they've been doing. If they trade back and turn one pick into multiple contributors, they strengthen the roster across the board. And if they trade up and land a true difference